Please join me in welcoming Mr. John Shook to the stage.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Good morning. Come on, we can do better than that. Good morning. We're in Nashville. It's a fun place to be. So we'll, let's see. Thanks, Bill and Ron and Industry Week and TBM. A longtime reader of your publications, and I've known TBM for a long time, and you guys do a great job, as do a lot of the people that are here. As both Bill and Ron said, manufacturing is not going away in this country. And we're going to do our best to make sure that it stays here. This is the cover from the book, one of the books that I just did that Bill mentioned. Hence the kind of funny title of the talk, Managing to Learn. It's a kind of a play on words, managing. So as we manage, I think one of the things we want to do is be learning all the time, ourselves as managers, and also helping our people learn as well. But it's also got the play on the word there that just trying to manage to learn. Sometimes in the heat of battle every day, especially the way times are now, it's hard to stop and take time to reflect. And sometimes we can just kind of barely hold on to get things done, much less take time to learn as we go about doing things. Now, let me make sure everything works here. Let's see, already I see the monitor's not working. The timer's not on. I bet if I push something here, it'll come on. Not sure what, there it goes, it's getting set. Always got to make sure the technology is okay, first of all. So this is from my hotel room. I stayed at the Hilton last night, which is nice. And it's fun to be here. How many of you are local from Nashville area? Let's see, a few hands went up. I'm going to test this. How many of you are not local? Okay, that was a test. And how many people are local? I'm actually from I was born about an hour west of here and lived there until I was, 8 years old. And lived really all along the Tennessee River until I left in 1980 to go to Japan. So when I used to come to Nashville back in the 60s and 70s, it didn't look anything like it does today. So a quick plug for Nashville, for those of you who are going to stay here. So we're over there in your left-hand corner. And along the block there, right in the middle, there's Tootsie's Orchid Lounge. And when I was here in the 60s and 70s, I think that and Ernest Tubbs Record Shop were the only things that were here, other than a couple of very seedy bars that most of the upstanding people here in this room would not want to go to. So it's changed a lot, and it's a great thing to see. I left Tennessee in 1980 to go work in Japan. Well, first of all, that's a long story. I won't get into that. Anyway, what I'm going to do is talk about Toyota a little bit today. But a couple of things about it. Toyota's not perfect. Never was, never intended to talk about it as if it is. And I didn't just start using this slide after their downturn of the last 6 months. I've been saying this for years. Toyota's a great model for us to learn from. They had an incredible run of success, and I'm sure they're going to come back from the current troubles. Not only was their run of success incredible, they work in ways that are very different from any other company that I've found, that many of us have found. Thank you for fixing the monitor. That many of us have found. I happened into it. I went to Japan first time over 30 years ago. I visited Nissan, not Toyota, actually. And Nissan's just down the road, and I think they're a host of some of the tours this time. Also a great company. 1977 was the first time I went to their Zama plant and decided then and there I wanted to go work in Japan. I wanted to go work for the biggest, most Japanese company I could find. And as luck would have it, I landed at Toyota in 1983. I didn't know they were anything special, really, at the time. They were just another Japanese company. They were big, and they were Japanese. And I wanted to learn about all those wonderful Japanese management techniques people talked about back then, because I'd read all these books that Japan was supposed to be great, and I was going to go learn about it and bring it back. Many years of learning since then, I found out there's nothing so special about Japanese management per se. But it turns out there was something about this company. The point is, as I talk about it, as we learn about Toyota, it's not really them, it's not about their cars, but as a matter of fact, it's about the way they manage and the way they operate. It is different than other companies, and it's something that we can learn and benefit from. So I will talk about them, but not trying to say they're perfect or that we want to copy them exactly or try to be them. What we're trying to do is change our companies. Bill talked about the kind of change that companies are undergoing, especially now in these turbulent times. And I'm going to consider everyone in this room a leader. We have CEOs in this room, and we have plant floor leaders in this room. But we're all leaders at some level of our organizations. And as I go around, I get this question a lot. And it's sometimes directly, sometimes almost always indirectly, which is, John, I get it. I know what to do. I get this stuff. I read Lean Thinking, Machine That Changed the World. I talked to Bill Schwartz once. I understand this, but I can't get my people to do it. That's my problem. I can't get my people to do it. The question that people come to me with then is, how can I get my people to do this? And so the question to you is, how can you get others to do this, to do Lean? And I'm going to suggest it's a simple answer. There's only one way. There's only one way to do it. And we'll get to that later. But first, just a note on what is Lean. And Bill, I don't know about you, but I think sometimes even after working with companies for a very long time, or even after doing this for many years, I feel like at the beginning of the day and at the end, we're really just talking about what is Lean anyway? What is it we're really talking about? And as I go around, just a quick definitional thing up front, I see kind of two camps of people in terms of what they think Lean is. And one problem with that is with the word Lean. And in fact, I saw it in one of the major newspapers just this past week. They were talking about a major company now that they've had this crisis, now they're getting lean. And of course, what the reporter meant by that was this particular company was downsizing. And that was about the extent of what they meant by getting lean. And there is that narrow definition, the tools, cost cutting, but there's another broader definition that I think at least Bill and I think of when we think of the word lean. It gets into the thinking. It's very systematic. It's talking about the entire enterprise. It is a business system in itself. And in that sense, it's very different than a lot of the other process improvement tools that are out there. It's not just a collection of tools. It's more than that. So I won't belabor this point. It is an economic crisis right now. And there is a danger that a lot of people are just going to go cost-cutting or hunker down and try to cut costs and just hold on until this thing ends. And I think that's very much the wrong strategy. I think that's going to hurt us a lot. So it's a time maybe to think about some lean history lessons. This is an economic crisis. Toyota, in fact, the Toyota we know today was born out of an economic crisis. Toyota's early days go back to about the year 1950. The Japanese economy was in total shambles. Toyota was making at that time about 1,000 units a month, 1,000 cars and trucks, big cars, little cars, bigger trucks, little trucks. Now, 1,000 units a month, for those of you who don't know the auto industry, that's about what you make off one assembly line in one day. And even at that time, for any of the Detroit Big Three, or if there were four at that time, not sure, they were making 1,000 vehicles a day off even one assembly line, and there were dozens and dozens of assembly lines. So you couldn't compare the economies of scale that you could try to attain. And in addition to only making 1,000 a month, they had to make the big ones and the little ones, the cars and the trucks. So they had to somehow deal with lower volume and high variety. And they were at that time just struggling to be able to keep up with Nissan. Nissan was actually a little bit bigger, they were in a stronger situation. And Toyota liked to make cars, they didn't know how to sell them, so they were in horrible debt and the banks refused to loan them any more money. And in the face of that situation, when the company basically was going under, that's when the founder of the company, Kiichiro Toyota, said to Eiji Toyota, the person who later became the chairman and who really built the Toyota management system, who then said to Taiichi Ohno, the famous inventor of the Toyota production system, we want to catch up with Detroit in 3 years. Totally out of the question, totally preposterous, completely impossible to catch up with Detroit in 3 years, but this is what he said to do. And I'll suggest that this is the time we also be needing to thinking out of the box, thinking very aggressively. That's what Toyota did at that time. And what Toyota came up with then was a system for success even in a down market. This is something that's missed by a lot of us today as we look to Toyota and other lean companies for lessons. Toyota Production System is a system for success in a down market. I'll suggest that even Toyota forgot that in the last 10 years, and that's one of the reasons they're in trouble now. But one of the things they said, Toyota leaders said at that time, was it's easy to make money when everyone's making money. The key is to be able to make money when times are bad. So when the sea is rising, all boats rise. It's when the sea starts going down, you have this turbulent water. That's when you can separate the really lean companies from those who are just fashionably lean, who are trying it out as the latest fad. You see a little icon up there. That's from another book that I helped with a translation of this book called The Birth of Lean that just came out. And if I could stop just 1 minute, Chet Martwinsky from the Lean Enterprise Institute is here. He's got some samples there in the back of the room because I think the Lean Institute is offering a 15% discount on these 3 books for the people that are here at the conference. I think you can pick up a flyer or something at the back of the room if you want. But this just tells the story of Toyota's thinking when they developed their system back in the early 1950s. And for people who think it was smooth sailing, this is a photograph of the labor strikes that they had in 1950 because they couldn't, since they had no money, one of the things they couldn't do is meet payroll. They couldn't pay people. They ended up having to lay off about a third, or fire about a third of the workforce. But as they did that, instead of just firing and downsizing and leaving and calling that lean, they did a couple of things. First of all, management also left. It wasn't only the labor, the union folks that got fired. Management fired themselves as well. Even that founder of the company that I mentioned, Kiichiro Toyoda, fired himself. He fired himself and his senior leadership team. In addition, they sat down with labor finally and said, we need to be into this together and create a shared destiny. And that was the real beginning of Toyota's success and the Toyota Production System. From just downsizing to shared destiny, and this is what shared destiny meant. They went to the union and said, we need you to support us in doing Kaizen. We need you to support us in developing and making improvements and eliminating waste. And the union said, if that's what can guarantee our job security, us, management, and us together, that's what we'll do. So the shared destiny is what led to the sense of shared destiny, and commitment to shared destiny is what led to the Toyota Production System. And this is the Toyota Production System house. I won't go into these details. I think you've all seen this before. If you haven't, I think you should take a look at it. But it's the kind of a simple graphic that shows the Toyota Production System as an overall system. You see at the top there the goals, quality, cost, and lead time, which was what they started out with. Of course, you have to add safety and morale. They rest on 2 pillars there. There's the just-in-time pillar, which is the flow pillar. So any of you here who studied theories of constraint or some theory of constraint or things like that, that's a way of achieving flow. That's what just-in-time is. That's the flow pillar. How you can get things to flow from beginning to end. The other side, Jidoka, that means building and quality. So those of us who study different quality systems, this is the way Toyota decides we're going to build quality into each process. Then at the bottom, all this on a foundation of standardized work and Kaizen. You have standards, but you're always improving those, always improving them. Those things, the flip side, the 2 sides of the same coin. You can't have standardized work that's going to stick without Kaizen, and you can't have Kaizen unless you have standardized work as a foundation. 2 sides of the same coin. So what you see then is something that looks like a system. You take away 1 pillar, nothing to hold up the roof. Take away the foundation, nothing to hold up the pillars. So it's kind of an elegant little thing. So just when I joined Toyota in 1983, this gave us an easy way to explain to people around the world what it is we were trying to do. And most important, in the middle there, you see people, 2 things about people being in the middle there. One is they're kind of surrounded, comforted by the house, okay? And another, they're the dynamic that makes the house work, that even creates the house at the same time. So I won't go into the details of that, except to say through about 20, 30 years of a lot of hard work, through trial and error, they put that system in place, developed it. And when I joined in 1983 in Toyota City, I landed in Toyota City in 1983, wanting to work for the biggest, most Japanese company I could find. I had learned to speak Japanese language to some degree, and those of you who were in East Tennessee in the mid-1970s might remember that East Tennessee in the 1970s was not a great place to try to learn the Japanese language. When I graduated from the University of Tennessee, I never met a Japanese person. No connection with Japan whatsoever. But I decided that's what I wanted to do. I learned the language a little bit, the degree that you can learn it from taking classes. Landed there in '83, ready to work. When I got to Toyota, what they wanted me to do, the only reason they hired me, I was the first non-Japanese to work in Toyota City as a regular employee. They only hired me because they needed me. They needed someone to help them transfer their system overseas. And so many of you, I'm sure, have heard about the NUMMI success story in California, 50-50 joint venture between Toyota and General Motors. This is a photograph from that, a group of the people that work there. So as it says, from internal success of the Toyota Production System inside Toyota in Toyota City, Japan, to now, starting in 1983, we're going to globalize. We're going to take this system around the world and see how we can do it, And my job was to help them do that. So this photograph, I don't think you can see it, but there's a date on it that says June 1984. This is the first group of plant floor supervisors to come from NUMMI to visit Toyota City in Japan to learn about TPS. Now, a lot of these people were considered to be troublemakers. About half of the folks you see in that photo are actually union people, and many of them are union members of the old GM plant in Fremont, the plant we took over, that was considered by GM to be its worst plant in the entire GM global system. Now, any of you who remember back to the early 1980s would remember that to be GM's worst plant in the early 80s was saying something. You had to be pretty bad to be the very worst. And this was certified worst. They did a quarterly quality audit, and this plant always came at the very bottom. Out of the hundreds of work sites that GM had worldwide, this came out the very bottom always. In the bottom three, it was competing with two others always. And this was the plant we were going to take over, and it was the worst quality and also considered the worst workforce. This was the workforce that would go out on illegal strikes and would intentionally sabotage quality. Again, if you studied lean, you know that lean begins with quality. You have to build quality in at every step. That's where you begin. If you can't do that, you can't do the rest of it. And this was not only as a workforce that you thought might not support us in building in quality, they would sabotage it. This plant, as we took it over with the same workforce, the exact same people working on the assembly line, all the way stamping, through the body shop, through welding, through paint and assembly, with the exact same people, went from the very worst quality in GM's system to, in 1 year, because this is June 1984, we just hired these people. We built our first car in December 1984, and the first quality audit GM ever did, this plant set a record for the very best quality score any GM plant had ever gotten. Now, that wasn't just a 10 or 20% improvement here or there. This was across the board total transformation, including a cultural transformation. The very same people that we were told were troublemakers, and were troublemakers in the old days. Now they were the biggest supporters of the system that you could find. So for the last 25 years, I've known that this will work. This will work for American industry. This is why I went to Japan to learn this. And I assumed within a year or two, Bill and everyone else, that this would be all over North America. And here it is 25 years later, and a lot of us are still struggling, still working to do this. And I think a lot of that must have to do with what Ron and Industry Week asked me to talk about today, which is leadership. So a question that's naturally comes up is, what is the role of leadership in this? And what you see here is a photograph also from 1984 of the first leadership team from NUMMI that visited Toyota City in spring of 1984. And if you can see the photograph, I'll call your attention to the tall fellow in the middle with the mustache. That's Gary Convis. We had just hired him from Ford. He was a plant manager at Ford, and we hired him as our senior production manager. He was general manager of the plant. And his role then was to bring his leadership team, to learn this system himself, and to help bring his leadership team along, and that's the team that you see there. Now, to explore that a little bit further, I want to share with you a quick view of kind of three models of leadership. This isn't meant to be real academic or something, but just real quick. I think everybody here that's worked very long at all, you've had at some point in your career, maybe early on, kind of a dictator for a boss. Someone who said, I'll decide. Do it my way. On the other hand, as we worked over the years, probably now you may have a boss, or you may be a boss, since we have bosses here, that's kind of on this other extreme, 180 degrees opposite, that says, you decide, it's up to you. I don't care. It's a laissez-faire type of manager. It says, here's the goals, here are the objectives, I don't care how you do it, it's up to you. If it goes well, let me know. If it doesn't go well, yeah, that's too bad for you. Kind of a laissez-faire sort of thing. It started in, I guess, the 70s or so. And honestly, in my view, that kind of leader is really more common nowadays. Although honestly, what we have a lot of times is confusion. Someone who's a dictator one day and then kind of a laissez-faire manager on the other. What I'm going to suggest is that the lean style of management that I saw of the good managers at Toyota, and I don't want to say that they're all the 100% perfect managers, but of the good ones. It's a different kind of a leadership. It meets in the middle, yes, but it's not just a blend of those two. It actually goes off at a right angle. It's a leadership style that says, follow me, because people want someone to take leadership to set direction. They need that. They have to have that. But also says, we'll figure this out together. Follow me and we'll figure it out together. That's the leadership style I saw. And here's the way I saw it put when I first started getting my head around this back 25 years ago. The head of the plant was Gary Convis, as I mentioned. The overall head of the overall operation was a Japanese Toyota employee named Mr. Higashi. And so all bosses are mentors in the Toyota system. Your job is to develop your people, always. And Mr. Higashi's job then was to develop Gary. And in the spring of 1984, Mr. Higashi said this to Gary. So Gary, I want you to lead the organization as if you have no power. Lead the organization as if you have no power. Now, that as if is very important. Gary had power. He was the plant manager. He could do a lot of things. But he's being coached to lead as if you have no power. Now, Gary came to me at that time, said, okay, John, you're supposed to, you're working here for Toyota and supposed to kind of be helping coach through this stuff. What does this mean? And I said, I have no idea. No idea what this means. I had been there about 6 months at that time. I was still learning about this. But it meant something very, very important. I found out as I started figuring it out in the years ahead. I spent 5 years in Toyota City working there. First the NUMMI project, then the Kentucky project, Canada, and then different projects around the world where I was helping transfer the Toyota production system overseas. And in my 5 years at Toyota, almost never was I told exactly what to do. Almost never. And that's pretty amazing. What's also amazing is it took me 3 years to realize that. It took me 3 years to kind of realize that, something interesting is going on here. At the 3-year point, I went to my boss and I said, I just noticed something. And he said, what? And by then, I'd realized that I was kind of being taught by the Socratic method, people giving you assignments and questions and making you think. So I knew, and you know what happens if you've ever had a Socratic method kind of a mentor, when you ask them a question, what happens is you get a question back. And so if you haven't thought through your question, you end up feeling kind of silly. So I thought it through, and I went to him and I said, I just noticed something. And he said, what? And I said, well, I've been here 3 years, and no one has ever really told me exactly what to do. No one has ever given me a solution to a certain problem and told me what to do and how to do it. Now, the first thing he said was, so it took you 3 years to figure that out? And I said, yes, and partly because you never really set me down to explain it to me. And here's the reason it took me 3 years to figure it out, because at the same time no one was telling me what to do, I wasn't just free to do what I wanted. And that gets to be a very interesting thing. What happened was I was given clear responsibility to propose countermeasures, to propose solutions to problems that I owned. And my bosses, my mentors, my seniors were going to do everything they could not to give me the answer. They were going to ask me questions, give me assignments so I could go find out the answer for myself. And and my boss said to me during that conversation something I'll never forget. He said, after the little going back and forth of why didn't you notice this sooner, he said, John, whenever you tell someone what to do, you take the responsibility for that action away from them. And I thought shortly after reflecting on that, and I still think now 25 years later, that that's an absolute human truism. It's got absolutely nothing to do with Japan. As far as I know, Socrates never went to Japan. But it doesn't mean you just turn people free. But whenever you tell someone what to do, you absolutely take responsibility. You take ownership away. You give them a built-in excuse. And if we go back to the old dictator style of managers, they do that all the day, all the time, every day. That basically we're telling people what to do, taking away the ownership, and then later we complain that people don't take ownership, that they don't take responsibility. But we're taking it away by the way we manage. But the other thing we do is just turn people loose and say, okay, you just figured out how to do it on your own, and then people don't get developed. What I was given instead, and this was the key to the system, the Toyota management system as I've come to understand it, you're given clear responsibility not being just lost, which as it is in most organizations I know, and you're proposing countermeasures to problems that you own. And so of all the things that are famous about the Toyota production system, this probably ought to be the most famous, because I'm suggesting that their way of managing solves an age-old dilemma of all large organizations, or even medium-sized, or probably even small organizations. Which the problem, there's all these books about organizational theory and about leadership and all that, and wonderful books and everything. But actually, the organization problem comes down to one very simple dilemma, which is you can't have one person telling 10,000 people what to do when, or 1,000 people, or even 100 people. You can't have one person telling 1,000 people what to do when. But the flip side of that is also true. There's a big but there. You can't have 1,000 people just doing what they want when they want to. From that is where we get all this organizational theory, we get hierarchies, you get span of control, and it kind of supposed to break down into a big pyramid. What I'm suggesting is the way Toyota works, by having people take ownership and propose solutions, it makes that whole dilemma melt away. It provides extraordinary focus. You get the direction, you get the control that you need. At the same time, maximum flexibility because no one's telling anyone exactly what to do. And it resolves that dilemma, that age-old dilemma of all large organizations, of control versus flexibility, of having the right direction versus the adaptability. That, I think, is, if there's a kind of a secret to Toyota's success, the success they had for many years, I think that's it. And I want to emphasize something here. I think a lot of folks that visit Toyota and see their leadership and management style, they see part of it, but you have to stay a little bit longer to see all of it. In 3 days, you can see that people aren't telling people quite what to do. But often that's misunderstood as this kind of enlightened modern management where you're just, everyone is, has their arm around each other and having meetings and everyone kind of going and doing what they want. It's not like that. It's as different from this kind of commonly accepted notion of the enlightened modern manager that just gives objectives and then says, I don't care how you do it, just as long as you get the job done. It's as different from that as it is the old command and control dictator. It's not command and control. And right now, it's everyone denigrates command and control. It's a bad thing. Everyone agrees with that. But I really never hear a real alternative to it, other than some kind of vague notion that everyone will somehow just agree and everyone will sing Kumbaya and do a good job. What we need to do is have leaders at every level setting direction and developing people so that they have solutions, make improvements to their own work. That, I think, is the solution, and that's the thing that Toyota managed to get done. So I break it down into these two things. Maybe I oversimplify it here, but I don't think so. I've been playing with this now for several years. I'm going to suggest that lean leaders, lean managers, or any successful manager, effective manager, does two things. One is to get each person who works for you. So if you have 10 people who work for you, if you have 20, if you have 5, you want to get each person to take initiative to solve problems and improve his or her work. So if it's a worker on the line and they have a 60-second cycle time in their job, they're making improvements in that, how to take out waste, how to improve quality, how to improve their service for their customer, who is the following process. If we have everyone doing that, number one, but number two, make sure that the work they're doing is aligned toward providing value for the customer and prosperity for the company. You have to have both of those things. If people are just at improving things, but it's not actually going to be adding value for the customer or prosperity for the company, that's not going to do us any good. We need to have both of those things done. And so if a manager can do those two things, anything that's left over becomes very, very easy and even trivial, I'm going to say. And here's kind of a different way of saying the same thing. This is an old slide that we used when I was there. We used simple cartoons for training. Almost all the training we did, we just used these simple cartoons, pictures worth 1,000 words. And this one is very similar to something you might have seen before in that it shows people climbing up a mountain. A lot of times you see this similar drawing where the person in the front is holding a flag, and you get to the top of the mountain and you put the flag on the top of the mountain. It says success, or it says Kaizen, or it says improvement, or something like that. Notice in this case, what you see is the leader turned around and pulling a rope. So it's a different kind of pull system, if you will. The leader's job is to develop the people. This is explicit understanding of what the leader's job is at Toyota. Get the job done, climb the hill, climb the right hill, the right path, and develop your people and do those things at the same time. This is the trick, but it all comes back to how you or any individual wants to lead and manage. If you want to be a command and control dictator, that's fine. You do that. I won't tell you have to follow a lean path. I got out of the convincing game. Bill, I left the convincing game years ago. I won't try to convince you lean is the right thing to do. If you want to do lean, then let's talk about how to do it. Let's talk about all the process side, the tool side, how to get it in place operationally, and let's talk about the management side as well. But it has to be something you decide you want to do. So how do you want to lead and manage in these turbulent times or in any times, really? This is the central question. And a model I use for that is Mr. Cho. He's currently the chairman of Toyota. He was my boss years ago. I was just in Toyota about a month ago. He was out of town. I saw one of his top lieutenants. I try to visit him about once every year or two. And I've never been the CEO of a large organization. And as I talk about leadership, I always feel like I maybe should quote somebody who has been, who is. I saw Mr. Cho in a lot of different roles. And during that time, I saw him be just an exemplary leader whether in Japan or Kentucky, whether in engineering or in the office or in the plant. And here are the three things that he said. He says are the keys to lean leadership. First of all, go see. Sounds very simple, but I think everyone here, I think, knows that often we don't do that. We sit around in a room, we try to solve problems from sitting in a room and talking about it. And usually half the room are people that haven't even gone to see it and don't necessarily know what they're talking about. As he said, senior management must spend time on the front lines. Whether those front lines are in the factory or they're in the dealership or they're in the engineering office, you have to go spend time on the front lines. And as you do that, you need to ask why. As he calls it the why technique. It's the 5 whys, but not just asking whenever you see something broken, but going to every situation in your organization and saying, why is this occurring? Why are things happening as they are? Using the why technique daily. And third, show respect. Respect the people in your system, respect the customer, respect all the stakeholders. Do these 3 things and you'll be heading in the right direction. These are ways to accomplish those 2 things that I mentioned just a moment ago. So these all sound so simple. Let's explore each one just briefly. Go see. So Taiichi Ono, the developer of TPS, one of my favorite quotes of his, he said, data is of course important, but I place greater emphasis on facts. And you can think yourself what he might have meant by about the difference between data and facts, but clearly what he means is what do we actually know of what's going on, not just numbers that can be manipulated to tell a lot of different stories. What do we know of what's going on? You have to go see. And there's a core Toyota view that almost to an irrational degree, that folks at that company, the leaders that I really respected at that company, thought this way, that you can understand everything that's really important about a company by observing from a good spot on the plant floor. I don't have to see your company HR statement, philosophy statement, to know that if you really think your people are your most important resource. I can go to your factory and see how you treat your people. That will tell me a lot more than any statement you have out of the HR department. I don't have to read a financial statement that tells me how you're spending money on new capital. I can go to the plant and actually see. I can see how business is doing. I can see if all the machines are humming, if they're working, or they're idle. I can go and I can see if those machines are actually supporting people to make their work easier, or if they're actually making the work harder in disharmony with the people that are there. I can see if it's old equipment that's broken down, or old equipment that's well maintained, or new equipment that's very actually difficult to use. Those things will tell me a lot more than anything I could determine from any documents. What really Toyota is trying to do is to use Deming's old PDCA cycle, management cycle, but use it with great diligence. PDCA is so easy to say. I think we forget how hard it is to actually do. But what we're trying to do, most places I go, people have an idea and they put it in place. Instead of PDCA, it's a little p and a big D. And then that didn't work, let's have another idea and then go try that. What we want to do is simply plan and do and check. And the A is not abandon. It's not plan, do, check, abandon. That's the next thing that we see a lot of places. Plan, do, check. Ask what we learned when we do our check, not just check the box and see do we get our numbers right. But then reflect on what we learned and make our adjustments and then standardize that to go forward. So it's when you put those together, Deming's PDCA with Deming's circle, and what I mean by the Deming circle is the way he would actually train people in the old days. Bill, you might have had this experience as well. I did. Since Toyota believes you can understand everything important about a company from a good spot on the plant floor, that's the way they often used to train people. Take a piece of chalk and draw a circle in the plant floor and say, stand here and observe this operation until you understand it. It's a great way of actually learning, getting observation skills and learning how things work, but it also takes quite a long time. And if we could put those 2 things together, then I think then we can approach what I think is important about Toyota's management style, which is this. Lean problem solving. What you see here, I'm sorry again if you can't see this in the back of the room very well, and I will make these slides available. So I'm not sure exactly how, but Industry Week will make these slides available to you later. But what you see is a quality room or engineering room or a improvement specialist room. And people using very sophisticated maybe quality analysis tools, figuring out what's going on in their company. Whereas right out the door at the Gemba, there's a problem right here, right now. And if there's one Japanese word you might learn, it's Gemba, which means the real place where the real work is taking place. That's what we want to do, is focus everything on where real value-creating work is occurring. And if we can get out of the room where we're using our sophisticated tools and go help the worker who's having a problem right now, then it becomes a lot easier, it becomes a lot more effective, and we can make true improvements and really change also the culture, I think, in our company. Because what Mr. Cho said, Mr. Cho was actually the person who led the development of that house that I showed a minute ago. I mentioned before that through probably, let's see, about 20 or 30 years, about 30 years of trial and error, Toyota put together the Toyota Production System. And it was after they did that, they sat back and looked at it and said, you know, we've created something here. Maybe we should call it something and learn and figure out how to articulate it, how to explain it. And that's when, in the early 70s, that they started really calling it the Toyota Production System and developed this house. Mr. Cho is the person who actually led the team that did that. And what he told me was that the whole purpose of that house, of having those two pillars there, and so that if you take one pillar away, the whole thing falls down, was to be able to go into any work situation and be able to determine right now if things are normal or they're abnormal. Are things normal as I expected them to be, or are they different? If I can do that, then I'm going to be able to then solve problems and head things in the right direction. And all of this then built on respect for people, which is, again, it's one of those words that becomes platitudes nowadays. But there are a lot of different ways of approaching a lean system, putting it together. I showed the house there. That's a conceptual thing. And people use value stream mapping, something I helped to kind of introduce about 10 years ago. But it's maybe the most effective way. You can also build your entire operating system from the worker out, from the operator out. You go look at the person, you look at the work, and you remove wasteful steps from his or her work. This is true whether it's a worker on the line or whether it's an engineer. And you want to remove the waste and isolate the waste, get it away. And after you've isolated it from the work, the direct work, you can start to eliminate it. But you want to eliminate it from the work that the frontline worker is doing until nothing is left but value-creating steps. We never want to waste any operator, any worker, any employee's time or effort. That's the most disrespectful thing that you can do in the lean view of the world. So back to this leading as if you have no power. What we want to do, as I said earlier, is to get the work done while developing people at the same time. We want to climb the hill, the right hill, get to the right peak, and develop the people so they can be developing other people so we don't have to always be pulling up the rope at the same time. Well, let's explore those two things. Since I said those are the two things you need to do, right? To get the job done requires this: solving real business problems and making improvement in the way the work is performed at each level of the company. That's front lines, all the way up to the CEO. In each activity of the company, and that's the plant, that's engineering, that's sales, that's support operations, finance and HR. In real time, not analyzing data at the end of the month, but in real time and at the root cause, what's actually causing this. And honestly, most places I go, this is very simple, almost another definition of lean. And this is something that's very rare. Usually all four of these bullets are something that's not in place. We're not doing it at every level, we're doing it at some of the levels. We're not doing it at every activity, it's mostly just manufacturing and operations, maybe in engineering. It's usually not real time, we're analyzing things after the fact, and it's rarely at the root cause. We're still throwing a lot of Band-Aids at things, is what I find. To develop people then requires providing them with the skills to do that. Providing them with the skills to solve real business problems and make improvements in the way they perform their work. Takes me to a quote that I like. Cheryl Jones is one of the early group leaders to join Toyota Georgetown in Kentucky. She's now vice president, I understand, of manufacturing there. And one of her early learnings was this: that continuous improvement comes from making mistakes and learning from them. These are words, again, easy to say. I think profoundly understanding them and putting them into place is what makes the difference. And a way to think about that is to ask yourself, perhaps, in your company, in your organization, or under your leadership or overall, how does your organization think about problems? Problems, problems, problems. They're everywhere, and yet sometimes we can't actually see them and grab them. How does your organization think about having them, go about finding them, dealing with them? Are they bad things that people want to hide? And honestly, that's a lot of what I see. One of my favorite quotes from another one of my favorite teachers at Toyota, and it's a fairly famous, well-known thing that a lot of Toyota leaders will say, which is, no problem is problem. I first heard it at NUMMI when there was a senior Toyota manager who had 10 high potential, very smart, and very good GM engineers reporting to him. And no matter what he would ask them about in terms of what was going on, their answer would be, everything is fine, we have no problems. And he honestly couldn't understand why they were saying that when all he saw was an absolute mess. He saw things, he saw equipment coming in late, and he saw it sometimes being damaged, out of spec when it came in. Nothing but problems. When he would ask him about it, they'd say, no problem. Finally, one day he blew up and said, no problem, it's problem. The manager's job, our job, is to see problems and to create systems so that others can see problems as well. So the GM managers who were there kind of scratched their heads a little bit. Now, I'm not trying to pick on GM here today. GM folks are my friends. I've worked with them for many years. But there's a very difficult challenge in turning that battleship around. And these people have done, those folks who were working there have done the best they could over the years. But getting this cultural change about the attitudes towards problems is one of the most important things. And they were scratching their heads. They couldn't understand what he was saying. And finally he said, no see problems, no need manager. That got their attention, kind of for the wrong reasons. They thought he was threatening to fire them, which he wasn't. What he meant was there's no purpose to have managers here if we're not seeing problems and helping others see them. That's what it's all about. There are always problems out there. That's what that little diagram again means. We can be in the room analyzing problems. When out there are problems there. We need to go see them. So that's why if you go back to this Toyota Production System house, at the top you see the words are changed. Instead of Toyota Production System, it says Thinking Production System. And another well-known sensei at Toyota said TPS is the right acronym, but it should stand for Thinking Production System. We want people thinking every time they do the job. If it's a 60-minute cycle on a 60-second cycle on an assembly line, or even shorter or even longer, people thinking every time they do their job. And getting people to think and take initiative, therefore, is obviously the key. How can we get people to think and take initiative? And again, that makes sense, at the high level, but what do you do with that? Well, you can ask yourself in your organization, do you have a process or a structure or a framework to help you and to help everyone identify problems? And often, again, as we go around, people don't. And to solve problems once we've actually identified them. And then thirdly, to lead and develop people. So it's not just you solving problems, seeing and solving problems, so everyone out there is seeing and solving problems. So in a highly performing Toyota operation or lean operation, including many of yours, instead of a team of industrial engineers, every worker out there is an industrial engineer. So the workers become engineers. The engineers become managers and developers. They're developing people and doing project management. The managers then become psychologists, basically, and trying to move people forward. Which brings us back to the notion of change and what the leader's role is. I promised you I would discuss this a bit. People tell me all the time, John, I can't get people to do this. And how can you get others to do this? I suggested that there's only one way. So honestly, it's a very irritating question. When you think about it, it's a very arrogant question. How can you get others to do this? There's only one way, which is that means that you have to do this. And for a lot of folks, I know that's kind of frustrating to hear because you think, well, I'm an area manager in the plant. Fine, I only have limited amount of area of influence, of responsibility, of authority. But you know what? I go to the plant manager after talking to the area manager. Says, the area manager says he could do this, if he had, the authority over the plant. So what about you? Plant manager says, well, yeah, I have the whole plant, but you know what? I don't have anything to say about setting the financial targets for this company, for this plant. The equipment acquisition, that's actually done by someone else. Purchasing brings me these parts that don't work. The suppliers never deliver on time. So if I was a VP, then I could actually get it done. So I go talk to the VP. And a VP says basically exactly the same thing. Said, yeah, I own all operations, but I don't own purchasing. Someone else actually goes out and identifies and evaluates the suppliers. And engineering keeps giving me these processes that don't work and these products that nobody can build. So then he says, if I was a COO, then I could get this done. And then finally now, after some years later, now that I left Tennessee a long time ago and I have gray hair and less of it, and I spend time now in CEOs' offices, there's no more frustrated person in the company than the CEO who can't get the things done that he wants to get done. Because he's over here being a dictator one day, do it this way, taking away responsibility from people. And the other day just saying, okay, we'll do management by objectives. I'll give you a target. If you hit that target, good for you. You don't get it, then bad for you. What you have to do at every level is simply start to manage in the way that we've been talking about. That's what I think. How can you get others to do this? There's only one way. The challenge is not getting other people to do this at all. The challenge is getting you to do this, or me. I'm not trying to say that just because I've been around this for so long that I perfectly embody this way of thinking and working all the time. We need ways to help ourselves. That's what these tools and processes are actually all about. We need things to make it easier. We have natural human tendencies, and in the heat of fire during the day, of course, we're going to sometimes act in not the most optimal way. And that's what these lean tools and processes are really all about, is to make it easier for us. So do you have a process in your company to help you do these things? When you go to the Gemba, actually, how do you do it? What do you look for? How do you know what to look for? Lean is very process-focused. We all know that. And by process, people will often copy the tools, the Kanban or the Andon. Which process is most important is the process of creating process through root cause thinking, through understanding why things are working as they are, why the problems are there. Lean is not jumping to conclusions, it's not jumping to solutions ever. Those famous tools, again, Kanban or Andon, even more than the mechanical benefit that they bring, they're frameworks for learning and improvement. That's what they really are. They're designed to make it easy to see problems. They're designed to make it easy to make improvements. And they're designed to make it easy to learn. I remember the first time I had one of my Toyota teachers. I'd been there for a while by this time. And he said, "John, you don't get Kanban at all." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Kanban is a tool for Kaizen. That's what it's for. It's a means for us to make things better. It's a tool for Kaizen. It's not just an inventory control tool or a way to get inventory down. It's a way to start improving the way things work." It took me a long time to get my head around that, but that's exactly what it is, and that's what all these tools are. So the reason we like to put these in place on the plant floor, like a production analysis board where we can see plan versus actual, standardized work, is to make it easy for us as managers, as leaders, so we can see if things are normal or not normal, so then we can ask why in an effective way that's actually developing the people that we work for. I don't know if there's a natural human tendency. Maybe. There seems to be. That the way we want to solve problems is we see a problem, we get some impressions, assumptions, and we jump to a solution. If there's something I see everywhere I go, it's a cultural thing, it's a thinking thing, and we just jump over and leap over the facts without even bothering to look at them. Whereas what we need to do is actually go through the facts to understand them, to stop basing our thinking on impressions and assumptions, to look at the actual cause and effect to develop a hypothesis. And this is a pretty hard thing to do. It's hard for me to do in the absence of having tools in place as well. So that's why we have a lot of these tools, including the A3 process that Bill mentioned, and I know that I think Jamie is here doing a workshop on it as well. That's what that is really for, Jamie Flinchball. That's what these tools are really for. So here's a quick look at the whole kind of list of how these things work together in this pyramid. At the top, you see improvement and engagement, how we improve, how we make improvements, how we engage the workforce. Well, we can do various things. Empowerment training, we tried that. QC circles, we tried those. They didn't work very well, did they? Suggestion programs, a lot of companies still have them. And 98, 99% of the time, they're totally ineffective. And you have Kaizen events that also, all of these can work. All of these can work. But only if they rest on a people management and development process that actually supports them. Rewards recognition, employee development, treating employees actually as citizens of the organization. But even that needs to have another bedrock underneath it, which is the process design, the design of the work itself. What's important about all those lean tools is the fact that they're designed in a way to engage the workforce. They're designed in a way to give responsibility to the people doing the work. Standardized work in Kaizen. I'm going to have an engineer actually develop a draft of what the standardized work kit is. Then I'm going to give it to the floor, I'm going to give it to the work team and say, this is yours. Now redesign it. Redesign it and keep redesigning it over and over so that you take ownership of it. JIT and Jidoka. The Kanban actually comes to the worker. When I worked on the assembly line in Toyota, I'd actually take the Kanban off whenever I open a new box, send it through. I would see that same Kanban come back through in about 3 days, and I would know how many times I would get a delivery later that Kanban was supposed to come back. That allowed me to see normal from abnormal. I knew how many boxes I was supposed to have in front of me. I could use that information then to start making improvements. A3 process, value stream mapping, Hoshin Kanri, all these do the same thing. They build PDCA into the work, and they're a way of getting responsibility and authority at the right level. A quick look at one of the most famous lean tools as I wrap up here. There you see an assembly line. You have a car moving along, you have your workstation that shows workstation 3, and it shows some markers there at the 10-second point all the way up to the 6-second point, which is the end of the cycle. And you see a rope overhead and the andon. Now, when I worked on the assembly line, I had to pull that rope many times. And what happens is, whenever you pull the rope, you know exactly what's going to happen. And you know when to pull the rope. Whenever you have a problem, there's a promise made by the company that says, we want you to be successful every time you do your job. And for you to be successful every time you do your job, you need to know exactly what success is and what your job is. And you need to be able to know, therefore, what a problem is, how to identify one. And you need to know exactly what to do once you've identified a problem. And you need to know what will happen once you've identified it. So I was taught to identify problems, and whenever I would find one, I would reach overhead. I didn't have to look for that rope. I would just pull it. It was right there. And the promise from the company is management. A leader will come. A leader will come to support you in your work, help you make a decision of what to do next within your job cycle. Within your job cycle, someone is going to actually come and help you do that. That's quite a promise. Now, when I worked on the line and building Corollas, getting in and out of a Corolla 500 times a day, I pulled the rope many times. I knew exactly what would happen. And our GM friends, going back to NUMMI now, saw that as well. And as we were getting the NUMMI plant up and running in 1984, our GM friends asked us, kind of like a little bit smirking because, you know, they had pride as well, and they saw this TPS, and they loved it already, but they, you know, said, well, you may not have such good luck doing this in the United States with a union workforce. And we had a union workforce. So they said, so, Toyota, are you going to put this stop-the-line system in place in Fremont, California? Kind of laughing, kind of thinking, surely we wouldn't be, you know, so crazy. And we said, yes, absolutely we are. And they said, well, you're crazy. I said, they'll stop the line. They already stopped the line without the rope system, without the andon system. I said, they'll stop the line all day long. And we said, yeah, but that's what we're going to put in place. And they said, you're going to give these workers the right to stop the line. And we said, no, wait a minute, you've got it a little bit wrong. We're going to give them the obligation to pull the rope and notify when they found a problem. Anytime they see one, anytime they see a problem, their obligation is to pull that rope and notify. That's their job, is to do that. Our job then, on the other side, is to support them so that they can be successful every time they do their job, all the way to the end of their cycle. That's what we put in place, and that's what brought about the culture change and the quality change at that NUMMI plant. And that's what I think is the secret to all the lean tools, and that's the secret to the lean tools that, as you put them in place, I think can help you can have the same sort of success. So Ron suggested that I just take a moment to address this economic crisis. Here's the only thing I'll say about that is this. This is the time that markets realign. I think there's a tendency of companies that I see now to want to cost cut and just hunker down and try to wait it out. Say, we just want to survive this until the end. But this is the time that markets realign. So this is the time to be as aggressive as you can possibly be. And aggressive in my book means a couple of things. One, on the strategic market side, but the other in the plants, the lean basics. In my view, and Bill, I'd be interested in your view on this, but in the last few years, a lot of the lean basics, even by good lean companies, have been forgotten. The most basic lean principle is overproduction. You never overproduce. And 15 years ago, when we were doing, visiting companies doing lean, it was all about overproduction. How can you stop overproducing to make just the right amount? But no one talks about that anymore. As we've had, this boom period of easy money with the loan issues, the China phenomenon, and before that .com, overproduction has been forgotten. And Toyota Production System is built on actually an agreement between customers and suppliers, so that you're not just working at the whim of what a customer may want at any moment. You have an agreement. And if you can actually be able to not short ship your customer based on agreement, but also not overproduce, you're going to have the shortest possible lead time. And that's been forgotten. So I think if there's anything we need to do operationally, it's get back to the basics of lean production on the one hand. And on the other side, be as aggressive as we can in the market. There is an individual here, Roger Hanay from Hanay Reels. And he's the fourth generation owner of the company. That began in 1933. 1933 was the last time that we saw a similar economic crisis to this. 1950, when Toyota rose up, was when they had a huge crisis there. The next big crisis they had were the oil shocks in the 70s. During each of those times of crisis is when they were able to actually increase their market position. So that's what's going to be happening now. We can either kind of wait it out and be at the mercy of however the different players in our competitive environment may fall, or we can try to kind of take our destiny in our own hands and be as aggressive as we can. So I think there's those two things: strategically be aggressive, and in operations get back to the basics, which I think have been forgotten in recent years. So, thank you, Ron. Any other question? Yes.
Hello.
Good morning.
Can you speak up a little bit about Japanese society and how they have implemented Lean at the service and the government level, if at all?
So speaking of Japanese society and whether or not there's Lean being applied in different areas in Japan. Well, the first thing I can say, I'll go back to my first experience there, which I was looking for Japanese management. I thought there was something Japanese about this. And I only landed at Toyota not because I was so smart and I knew that Toyota was somehow different. It was completely luck. As it turns out, Lean is no more common in Japan than it is anywhere else. If you visit the average company over there, they're no leaner than the average company here, and often less so. And then if you go to the Japanese government, there are probably fewer, less lean governments anywhere. There's been some movement of that in Japan. I was actually last month when I visited Toyota, I visited the Toyota hospital. You know, healthcare is one of the areas of lean nowadays in North America and around the world that's really booming. Hospitals have found that lean works there, kind of to my surprise. But as it turns out, it applies just directly and completely, and it's a wonderful thing. It's good news that hospitals are embracing lean. Quality is getting better, costs are coming down, the work environment is better for the people who work there. And around the world, that's taking place, but not really in Japan, except a couple of hospitals, Toyota Hospital being one of those. The Japanese post office has also done a little bit, but basically, I think thinking that there's anything Japanese about it is kind of the wrong way to think of it. There's really nothing very much Japanese about it. There are probably 100 or so companies in Japan that are really deeply into lean, so no more than you would find, I think, here or anywhere else. So thank you. Good question. Yes.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
You talked about showing respect for people. What's the best way to measure morale?
The best way to measure it. The thing that I look for is the degree to which a company in their lean initiative is seeking compliance versus people actually taking initiative. And for example, standardized work. Because standardized work really gets into the work people do. And I don't know many companies, most places that I go, that's still something we struggle with. And I spoke with actually George Koenigsegger, who's someone many of you may know, who was talking about his visit to Toyota not so many years ago. And he said, what are you working on now? He was looking for the next great advancement. What's the next big advancement in lean? He said, what are you working on now? And the Toyota leader, the president, said, we're working on standardized work. So after 30, 40, 50 years, we're working on standardized work and actually getting it in place. But the key to putting standardized work in place is I talk with a lot of companies that say we're not having luck with it. Our workforce just isn't cooperative. We're often seeking compliance. So as soon as you detect that we're chasing compliance, you know that you're doing something wrong. The standardized work should be making work better for the people, for the employees. It should be making the work easier because you're getting them involved and taking barriers away from them being successful when they do their job. So whenever there's this fight, this imbalance, that we're going after compliance, the workers won't do the standardized work, why don't they do it? So actually going to the workers and saying, why can't you do this standardized work is a step that often folks don't do. They're saying, well, we've developed this great standardized work, our engineers worked on it, or we did it during a Kaizen event, and the workers aren't following it. That's the problem. Why aren't they following it? There's something that's wrong in there, and our job is to go in and find out what that is. So that's what I look for. For internal measures, people look, what Toyota looks at is a number of effective suggestions. It's one of the most important things that they look for. But that means having an effective suggestion system in place to begin with. So when the number of suggestions start falling off, you ask, why is that? What's going wrong here? And very often you find that the workers aren't engaged, and people not being engaged, I think, is a result of feeling that they're not feeling respected. And that was the starting point for what we did in the turnaround at NUMMI 25 years ago, and in other effective transformations I've seen, is where we show that we're doing this, we're trying to make our lives better. We want to do things better for the company, for the customer. We want the company to make money, and we're going to do that by making your job better for you. So if we have that in place and we have measures for that, and number of suggestions is a good one, but that means doing all the work to put a real suggestion system in place so that people aren't just doing standardized work, but they're doing Kaizen at the same time. So a good question, an important question. I'd be glad to explore it further as we finish up here. Thanks. I think guys, any others? Yes.
Good morning.
Good
Basically, this goes in line with what you just described. However, related to people engagement process to generate and implement ideas by employees, what have you seen as the best people engagement program to allow employees to use their creativity and implement ideas by themselves?
The sound up here isn't great. If I understood you, it was what means have I seen that are best to be able to, for people engagement systems for getting people to submit ideas and get those ideas implemented. Let me tell you. Take a minute for a quick story. I'm going to go back to NUMMI again, not because I want to go back to old days stories, but because I think it still applies. That joint venture, again, was intended to be, and was, a 50-50 joint venture, so GM folks were involved as well. So part of my job was to teach General Motors, even when I worked for Toyota. Now, one of the things that GM wanted to learn about was Toyota's suggestion program, our suggestion system. So they sent a specialist on suggestion systems from Detroit to work with us at NUMMI for 6 months in 1985. So I met with this individual in the beginning, and we talked about what the program is. He stayed there, and he worked with it for several months. And then I met with him, a nice long conversation just before he was leaving, after 6 months of studying Toyota's suggestion system. He didn't want to go back. Didn't want to go back to GM. So why not? He said, well, when he was sent by GM, dispatched to NUMMI to learn about Toyota's and NUMMI's suggestion system, he was given marching orders. He was given the instructions to not bring back any suggestion process that would accept a suggestion that did not save at least $20. Now, why did he have those marching orders? Because someone had done a financial analysis inside GM and realized that to process a suggestion was going to cost at least $20 of administrative time. So if it didn't save at least $20, it wasn't going to be worthwhile. So after 6 months, he was slapping his head against his forehead and saying, this is insane, because he understood then what Toyota's suggestion system was all about, which it had nothing to do with saving $20 or $100 or $1. What we were doing was actually buying people's engagement. In Toyota's case, the suggestion system is you make a suggestion on your work, not on where to place the Coke machine, not on something that's grandiose that has to go to some evaluating committee that's far away. You make a suggestion based about your work. You make that suggestion to your supervisor, your team leader, group leader. You implement it now, right now. You get immediate gratification in terms of trying your idea. As it works, then they'll give you usually, at least when I was there, $10 or $20, something like $10 or $20. It's not a lot of money. It's not like several $1,000s. But whenever you have a suggestion system that gives an award of several $1,000s, you're going to have a committee that evaluates it, right? And that's going to take time. And by the time that's done, the problem is already gone by then. Or engineering says, well, we were going to do that anyway. And you get into all kinds of problems like that. Whereas I've seen, I knew one case when I worked actually at Takaoka plant in '84, where I knew one person who submitted a suggestion about how to do the work differently. And he got his $20. Okay? It was a small thing. It was a small standardized work adjustment. And, of course, when you do standardized work, one of the problems, of course, is communicating with other shifts because other people do the same job. And so they did that. And after a few weeks, they found that, the other way of doing the work was actually better after all. So what did they do? That GM way of thinking would have said, okay, give us the $20 back. What we did in that case is we said to the worker, submit another suggestion. We'll give you another $20 to put the job back the way it was. It's $20. What we were doing was buying the engagement of that individual. So it's very important that all those kind of suggestion programs deal with the person's work, that it be immediate, and that, again, is the way I think of showing respect more than anything else. We're saying we want you to engage your mind. So that's why Toyota has, on average, about one suggestion per worker per week. and 99% of those are implemented. And those are incredible numbers compared to the way we usually do suggestion systems. Nissan and Honda have similar programs in place. Those are just phenomenally different than what we have in most companies. I know, because what we're chasing, what we're trying to do is very different. Often the suggestion won't even save any money at all. It might be a safety suggestion that actually costs money. So what you're trying to achieve needs to be very, very clear, needs to be communicated very, very well to all the people. And then it's going to take a while to get that culture in place for it to work. But if you stick to that and with sincerity about what you're trying to achieve, then it can work. So again, very important question. Thank you. And Ron says we can have one more.
I have a question here in the back of the room to your right, John.
Okay. And try to speak up. It's a little hard for me to hear you up here.
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've always wondered about what I call the paradox of the Toyota production system, where Toyota, like most major car manufacturers, has a captive customer base in their dealers, okay? Most major manufacturers tell the dealers how many automobiles they'll take of what model each year, and the dealers have to take those models. The ultimate customer, me, the consumer, goes to the dealer and hopefully finds what we're looking for. BMW is going more to a make-to-order, where I can go in as a customer and tell them what I want and when I want them, and the plant will make that model for me and I'll get it. Do you see Toyota moving more to a make-to-order, really tying production to customer demand? And if so, what kind of changes do you think that will mean for Toyota or for the rest of the auto industry?
Okay, again, maybe that's one we want to explore some, after we finish here as well. I think it's a great question. I agree with your point. The Toyota production, part of the paradox is that in terms of their capability in the plants, they can build to order to a much greater degree than they do. And over the last, I think, 10 years, they've gotten further actually away from that. And I think one of the reasons, about 10 years ago, I think Toyota started to kind of go off rails just a little bit. And one of the ways they did that, as opposed to challenging to be the best, they decided to start to be the biggest. And as they started chasing numbers and even profit per vehicle in recent years, I think that took them down a path that's further away from what the customer necessarily really wants. So if any of you have ever actually been to a Toyota dealer to try to buy one, you'll realize exactly what he's saying. There's some truth to it, which is often you can't get exactly what you want. And that's not what the Toyota production system was based on. Now, when I worked for Toyota in Japan, let's see if I can explain this briefly. We had orders that we would set the orders, the basic running pattern for the plant in terms of volume, 1 week before the month started. Then we would adjust that volume every week during the month, but we didn't actually send the order from the dealers in until every day. Every single day there would be a number of actual different orders, and that sequence would be set. We're going to make a 4-door green one with automatic transmission, then we're going to make a 2-door hatchback with a manual transmission. That sequence will be changed every single day based on customer orders that were coming in daily from the dealers there in Japan. So that capability was in Japan, and that's the way they were working 25 years ago. They had that capability here in terms of the manufacturing system, but they never put that ordering system in place, and something I would agree with you that they need to look to. If they were looking at that right now, I don't know, but as they revisit the basics, which is they say is what they're doing, I certainly hope I think that's one of the things that they should do. I think they need to look at what BMW does, but they need to do that in a much shorter lead time. With BMW and Audi, it's about a 3-month lead time. You can get what you want, but it takes usually at least 3 months. And what they need to do with the plant capacity they have here now, I think they could be able to do that within the month. And I think that'd be a great goal and challenge for them to undertake. So great question.